Right, so as we're going through and we're working on our hypothesis test, the first thing that we're going to talk a little bit about here are mistakes. So the only way to reduce the probability of both types of mistakes is to increase the sample size. Increasing the sample size improves the precision of our test, which we talked about in previous chapters, so we make mistakes less often. We cannot make the significance level too small, too close to zero, because this increases the probability that we mistakenly fail to reject the null hypothesis. So when we're going through and doing these problems, we want to take matters to make sure we minimize our mistakes. So we can't eliminate them totally. We want to make sure that we do not make these mistakes when possible. So again, a reminder of our potential mistakes that we can make. There's 4 possible outcomes in hypothesis testing. 2 of the outcomes are the correct decision. The other 2 are mistakes. Right? So good decisions that we fail to reject the null hypothesis when it is true. Right? So this is like, again, if we think about analyses and we're thinking about a jury verdict, right? So in that case, it would be, both of our, or if we reject our null hypothesis when it is false, that would be sentencing or finding somebody guilty that is guilty, or finding somebody that is not guilty that is indeed not guilty. So those are our good results. Right? Our bad results in the courtroom would be finding somebody guilty when they're not, or not finding somebody guilty when they are. Right? And those types of bad mistakes are similar to rejecting our null hypothesis when it is true, or failing to reject our null hypothesis when it is false. Just a reminder, the failure to reject our null hypothesis when it is true, the probability of doing that is called the significance level. So that's one way we are minimizing our mistakes as we're going through. Right, so in this first example in this section, we're going to look a little bit more at these mistakes. Suppose a political analyst is interested in predicting whether a school bond measure on the ballot will pass. Her hypotheses are null hypothesis P equals 0.50. Our alternative hypothesis P is greater than 0.50. Describe the 2 types of errors she might make in conducting this test. Explain what a 5% significance level means in the context of this problem. All right, so one possible bad conclusion that we see up in the table above is rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. All right. So this means concluding that more than 50% favor the bond when the actual proportion is 50% or less. Right, so we rejected the null hypothesis. We said that it was not 50% when it actually was 50%. Right? As far as our significance level, right, the 5% significance level means there is only a 5% chance of making this mistake. So rejecting the null hypothesis when it's true is one possible mistake, and our significance level tells us how much of a chance there is of making this mistake. Right, the other possible mistake that could be made is failing to reject the null hypothesis when it is false. In this particular scenario, this means concluding that 50% or less favor the bond when the actual proportion is more than 50%. So two different possible types of mistakes. We can reject the null hypothesis when it is true. Again, that's tied to our significance level. Failing to reject it when it's false is our other possible type of mistake. One other place that we can make a mistake is in our interpretation. So even if we come to the correct conclusion, we can still make a mistake in our interpretation because we can never be 100% certain that our conclusion and hypothesis testing is true. We must choose our language carefully in our interpretation. When interpreting, avoid using the following phrases. We accept our null hypothesis. We have proved our null hypothesis is true. Say instead, we have failed to reject our null hypothesis, or we cannot reject our null hypothesis. So as you're going through and you're working through these problems, with multiple choice ones, it's not necessarily that big of a deal, but if you are working on writing your own interpretations, then we want to make sure that we are choosing appropriate language in those interpretations as well. We want to avoid that mistake as well.